Hello, Symposias. I'm Dr. Angela Puka. I'm Religious Studies PhD and University Lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and the impossible. So before we start with our special guest today, I'd like to remind you that this project of delivering free academic scholarship based on peer-reviewed sources and bringing you guests and everything is a crowdfunded project. So if you have the means and can support my work, please consider doing so on PayPal, joining my fantastic growing Patreon community. There are also other options on Coffee and checking out my services at drangelapuka.com. And thank you all for considering. All the links are in bio, the info box, description, everywhere. So thank you all for considering. And now that I have done some symposium keeping, I can bring on our special guest for today. And it is Dr. Jeff Kripal. Hello.
Hi.
Jeff.
Hi,
How are
Angela.
you?
I'm well.
I'm glad that you're here and that you join us.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us something about yourself before I start with my questions?
Yeah, sure. I can sound like a resume.
No.
So my name's Jeff Kripal. I did a PhD in something called the history of religions back in the late 80s and 90s. And I've been teaching now for actually 31 years. 32 years, I guess. I guess it's the new year, isn't it? I started out in the study of Hinduism and the study of medieval Christianity, and then I sort of morphed into the study of basically American studies and what most people think of as the paranormal, which involves, at least in the States, things like parapsychology and counterculture and esotericism and literature and film and all kinds of things. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years. And we now have at my university, I teach at a place called Rice University in Houston, Texas, which is a private, secular, research-oriented university, quite small by American standards. And we have something called the Archives of the Impossible there, which is a collection. It's an actual physical archival collection of about 15 different collections that we've been accepting carefully since about 2016 or so. And these involve around what I call impossible phenomena, things that are not supposed to happen, but clearly do. Things like the UFO phenomenon, things like physical mediumship, things like remote viewing. A lot of parapsychology is in there. So just a whole bunch of things. And we host, or I actually host or co-host conferences every year or every other year around these archives. They're called Archives of the Impossible conferences. And they're very big in terms of the people that both come to them and sign up for them. And then there's sort of life on the internet afterwards. And they create a kind of community, Angela. They kind of create a physical community for people who come, certainly from the academy, but also outside the academy. A lot of artists, a lot of practitioners, a lot of experiencers, just really anybody interested in the topic. And so that's what I've been doing for about a decade now. I pretty much do that every day. I also write. I write a lot of books. I write because I love to write. I don't write because I have to write. I write because I want to write. I need to write. And so I write about these things a lot as well.
There are also links to some of my favorite books of yours in the description box so that people can check those out.
Okay.
And can you tell me more about, or tell us more about the Archives of the Impossible? So how did the project start? And you said that it's a physical archive. So what does it mean? Does it mean that it has like physically written reports from people? Are there also videos? And so tell me more about it.
Yeah, yes, and yes. I mean, the way these started was somewhere back in 2014. I was approached by a man named Jacques Vallée, who probably most of your listeners know. Jacques is sort of the world's premier writer on the UFO, and is also very interested in parapsychology and esotericism. And Jacques was very concerned about the future of his files and papers and correspondence, and asked me for help placing them in a university archive, because he he became convinced that the university archival situation was the most permanent option available. It's not completely permanent. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than, say, just releasing or selling your documents to an antiquarian bookseller or something, and then they just disappear, into the ether, as it were. And so I worked with Jacques for about 2 or 3 years negotiating that gift. And that gift was our first gift. It's composed of about 60 archival boxes. You asked what they are physically. An archival box is 3 feet of material. It's in a paper archival box that doesn't age or rot, and they're stored in a climate-controlled building, by the university. So it's an institutional archive that literally stores these boxes in a gigantic warehouse. Really, is what it is. And after Jacques, I then went to a man named Whitley Strieber, and I went to a man named Ed May, and we just kind of had I call it a black hole of gravitas, of gravity, and just people kept wanting their life work stored in some fashion. They wanted their legacy preserved in some way. And this was a really good way to do it. And so we have 15 of those collections now, and probably about 1 million or so documents. Those include letters, videos, seance tapes, by the way, magazines, drawings, private and public artwork. It's medical records that are some of the most sensitive. For a lot of ethical and moral concerns, we have to be very careful about those. So there's just a lot of data in there, a lot of things, and a lot of historical documents, particularly from the States.
And how did you collect all this material, and what are the criteria for inclusion and exclusion? Well,
yeah.
I'm an academic.
The criteria is you're looking at them. You're looking at. I mean, I have to go to my colleague Amanda Folke is her name. She's the director of Woodson Research Center, which is the center that archives these. And there's a staff of archivists, and we have to be very careful about what we accept. And the truth is, I don't accept all proposals, because every proposal or every gift we accept represents hundreds of hours of archival work and space in a climate-controlled building. So criteria, we're looking for material that is one of a kind. We're not looking for stuff that's been published or widely available. So we're looking for letters and drawings and tapes and things like that. We're looking for, and I really am also thinking about the significance of the researcher, whether the person's life work belongs in this collection. And we call it Archives of the Impossible after a book I wrote called Authors of the Impossible. And it really, the bottom line is these have to be about things that are not supposed to happen. So things like clairvoyance, precognitive dreaming, UFO encounters, again, physical mediumship, just things that are strange or out of the ordinary or considered to be impossible. That's really what drives the collection. And remember, this is a secular research university that's heavily oriented towards STEM, by the way. And I'm of course not in STEM. I'm in a department of religion. I'm in a school of humanities. So this is placed there. It's really generated by that department and by that school. But it very much involves a lot of scientists as well.
But can people access these archives? So
yes.
Anybody can access this archive?
Yes. Okay. So there's a couple answers to your question, because I can kind of read your mind, because I'm not psychic, Angela, but I've heard these questions before. The other question that always comes is what's been digitalized, what's available online. The truth is that donors themselves are ambiguous about digitalization. And digitalization is tricky because of protecting people's identity. And because this is a university archive, we are under the rubric of something called the IRB, which is an institutional review board, and we have to be very careful with people's identities. And so different parts of the collection are certainly available to researchers who come to the university, and anybody can do that, by the way, Angela. You, for example, could write Amanda tomorrow and say, hey, I'm going to be in the archives next month and I want to see this collection and this. You got to tell the staff what collections you're interested in so they can have those collections there. Then you go into a reading room and you study those documents in the reading room. A few of the collections are indeed on what we call moratorium, and that means no one can see them. And that's not a decision I make. It's a decision the donor makes. The Jacques Vallée collection in particular is on moratorium. So is the John Mack collection, which is John was a psychiatrist at Harvard who interviewed abductees in the 1990s, essentially. So a few of those collections are indeed not accessible, but most of the rest are to people who come to Houston and who are willing to sit and study with them. And we have had people who have come for weeks, if not months, and sit with the collections. Particularly artists, by the way. Artists are especially drawn to these collections because, first of all, they contain a lot of art, a lot of original, hand-drawn art of things that were encountered or seen. But they also represent a kind of creativity, a kind of human ability that is not generally seen outside archives like this.
And why are the drawings specifically, or the pieces of art, why do they classify as impossible?
Well, you should see the drawings. I mean, they're drawings of things that other people can't see, craft or entities or beings. They're often one of a kind. They happen once in a life, or they happen only to that person. And the person, in these cases, really does think on some level the best way to communicate the experience is to draw it, is to show it as an image and not only to write it out or to talk about it in text. I think that's one of the lessons of the archives. It's not just textual. It's audio and it's also video as well, and it's also art. It really encompasses the whole human sensorium.
Mm. So how do you define the impossible? What is the impossible by your definition?
So the impossible, is for me a way of thinking philosophically about this material. And the bottom line is, of course, the impossible is not impossible. That impossibility is a function of your worldview and of your assumptions. It's actually not a function of these people's experiences. These things happen all the time. People experience these things all the time. And then intellectuals, particularly intellectuals, say, oh, that can't happen. And then they take it off the table and they render it impossible. And so when I refer to something as impossible, it's a way of acknowledging its non-place on the academic or scientific table, but also as a way of affirming its reality and affirming that it in fact does happen. It's part of our world. So it's an ambiguous, paradoxical kind of category, at least the way I use it. And the truth is, people they love the phrase "archives of the impossible" because that's what it is. That's exactly what it is, and it just captures for people what certainly is going on at Rice.
Mm. And do you think that the impossible is that it's possible to integrate the impossible into academic discourse?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we talked about this earlier. The answer is no. I don't think it can be integrated, but I think it can be acknowledged.
Depends also on the field, because I think we were talking about a specific field there.
Yeah, if we're talking about the study of religion, well, we're talking about different things. If we're talking about the study of religion, I have one answer. If we're talking about science, I have another. Certainly the study of religion, which we both have degrees in, this stuff is everywhere. I mean, this is what religion is. It's basically people experiencing weird shit and then creating cultural movements or art or architecture or texts around it. And it clearly does happen. And I think what has happened in the study of religion in the last 40 or 50 years, certainly in my life, has been a fantastic mistake, frankly. I think we have shoved these events away, and we have created a system of knowledge where religion can be talked about at arm's length as a third person kind of objective social phenomena, but we have not been able to talk about it as a first person kind of direct experience. And I just think that's a mistake. It's a philosophical mistake, but it also leads to tremendous human suffering, because then people have these experiences and they have nowhere to go. They have no one to talk to. There's no framework to make the impossible possible for them, to use my own language. And so that's what I'm trying to do, or that's what I try to do in my writing and in my work, and in my classes. But it's also, I think, what we're trying to do with the archives is give people a broader framework or a worldview in which maybe their experiences aren't integrated, don't make sense to them, but at least can be acknowledged that they happen. So I would say that acknowledgement can indeed and should indeed happen, but whether they can be integrated in some kind of rational or social system, I have serious doubts, because I just don't think they're rational. I don't think they're purely social either, by the way.
What do you mean?
I don't think they're functions of history or of society or of embodied human beings. I think something else is going on. I think those things are all involved. Those bodies and those identities and those societies are all part of the uptake or the interpretation of these events, but the events themselves and whatever is interacting with the human being, I don't think is part of social history.
So do you think that the place of these impossible experiences is still at the margins in a way?
I think it's necessarily at the margins. That's not something I am complaining about. I think it can't be rationalized. It can't be reduced to whatever our system or our theory is. That's what I mean by how to think impossibly. How to think impossibly really comes down to don't reduce the phenomena to your whatever it is. I don't care if it's Christian theology or Michel Foucault. I don't care. You cannot reduce the phenomenon back to the system. You can certainly say something about it through these systems, but you can't actually explain it away by invoking a set of categories, whatever they are.
So how should people treat such experiences when they occur? How can they make sense of them?
That's the question. I'm not sure we can make sense of them. I think that phrase, at least in English, is telling. Making sense of something means reducing them to the human senses. But what if they're not reducible to the human senses? What if they're not sensible? And I think what to do, I don't mean to be opaque or dodge your question. I think what to do, the first step in what to do is that we acknowledge that they happen, that they're real. And by real, I mean they happen. I don't know how they're real. I don't know what their ontological status is, but I know very well that they happen over and over again, because I know people to whom they happened, and I believe these people. And these people are generally traumatized, by the way, by them. These are not happy, easy events. These are very difficult, traumatic, emotional, but also often very significant. Probably sometimes the most significant thing that ever happened to them.
And before we started, the topic that I was initiating with you, because I wanted to gather what were your thoughts about it, is something that I haven't talked so much about on the channel, but I've had a lecture with my patrons on pretty much why proving magic scientifically is impossible and even undesirable. Obviously, this is my view. I presented my own argument, And to make it brief, even though it was much more complex, but to make it brief, I'd say that the problem with trying to prove magic scientifically, which is something that many practitioners really desire, they really crave that sort of scientific validation.
Right.
But the problem with that is that the way the scientific method is designed, it is designed with a reductivist approach, and it works really well. It is really effective for everything that is physical and measurable. However, when it comes to magic or esoteric practices, or what you would call the impossible, these are just much wider than the way that the scientific method is designed. So it's just trying to fit something much wider into something super small that it just wouldn't allow for it to fit. So that is my problem. So personally, I don't, also by the way that magic works, the way the practitioners talk about it, it just doesn't make sense to me how you would maintain the academic rigor, the scientific rigor, and prove the existence of magic, when magic often works by acausal connections. And so it just works in a completely different way that the scientific method is not designed to assess. The scientific method is designed, and it does assess very effectively other aspects of reality, the physical aspects of reality, the measurables, and the universal aspects of reality, but not experiences like magic and esotericism. So I wanted to know what you thought about that, because there are many people, even in so-called parapsychology, and that actually are really doing their best. And I think it's worth to have those experiments, and it's worth to have those studies, because who knows, maybe they can prove me wrong. And it's always better to have more data than have less data. But I just struggle to see a rigorous study that that is in those fields. So I wanted to know what you thought about that. Obviously, we can also disagree.
Well, I think a lot about that. I mean, pretty much everything you just said. Kind of let me hit it, Angela, at different angles. I like to orbit around a topic and kind of poke at it in different ways, and then you can kind of get a picture. And it's not that I have a clear answer either. I don't think I do. One of the things I do in Authors of the Impossible, and one of the things that religious traditions have been very consistent about, is they basically encouraged ignoring these phenomena. Ignore them or condemn them, And basically what I do in Authors of the Impossible is I say, don't do that. These phenomena are what I call non-dual signals. They're forms of mystical experience that haven't really developed yet, but they're kind of early signals or warning signs of something that might yet develop. And I think this gets to the heart of the scientific method. The scientific method, which I do know something about, I spent months with scientists sitting around and listening to them. The scientific method works from a kind of dualism, that the subject is observing an objective world of matter and objects, and it's predicting the behavior of those objects in a very dualistic way. And what I think magical or certainly mystical experience is about is collapsing that subjective objective split, and it results in some kind of unity with the physical world. And that's why the world can be manipulated as well through these magical acts. And so there's a kind of non-duality or mystical unity at the base of this that just renders the scientific method silly and useless, frankly, to try to understand that unity. Now, having said that, let me give you a joke, an image, and then a cartoon, and then maybe another story. The image I use a lot is, I was like, you don't go to the North Pole to prove the existence of zebras. If you go to the North Pole and look for zebras, guess what? You won't find any. And you will conclude that zebras don't exist. And you will be wrong. because you did not go to the environment that actually where zebras actually live, which is it happens to be in Africa. So you will massively misinterpret the context of the phenomena you are trying to understand. And I think that's what's happening when we look for scientific proof of paranormal or impossible phenomena. And also, this is exactly what I don't mean by impossible thinking. This is possible thinking. This is reducing something to a science, a physics, a biology, a neuroscience, whatever it is, and then saying this is the explanation for it, right? And so what you do is you take off the table everything that doesn't fit into that scientific model, and maybe it's a social model, or maybe it's a psychological model, maybe it's a religious studies model, but you take everything off the table, all the precognitive dreams, all the entities, all the magical occurrences, and then you say, oh, I can explain everything on the table. And my reply is always, well, of course you can explain everything on the table. You just took everything off that you can't explain. Of course religion looks like a social phenomenon. You just removed all the stuff that is not social and that is not psychological. And so that's what I think people are doing when they do this. And that's why I think these impossible phenomena are so powerful and useful for the study of something like religion, is because they reintroduce the personal, they reintroduce the subject, they reintroduce the anomalous into systems that really can't handle it and that really kind of explode because of it. The cartoon I always think of here, I saw it as a kid. I mean, why do I remember this? I was probably 11 years old. I was reading a Mad magazine, and there was this scientist. He was a botanist, and he was looking for a special kind of flower that blooms like once every 20 years in the deserts of Egypt. I don't know. I'm making all that up. But he's like going around and he's looking for this flower, and he finally finds that flower that's blooming and blossoming out of this desert sand, and he puts his magnifying glass on, and the sun comes through the magnifying glass and burns up the flower, turns it to smithereens. I think that's what you're talking about when you look for scientific proof for magical phenomena. The magical phenomena is the flower in this case, and the scientific method is the sun coming through the magnifying glass and turning what you're looking for into a kind of non-existence. So I think the scientific method, in principle, is not capable of understanding this stuff. It's not that we don't have good enough science, or that we don't have enough technology, or we haven't thought about it long enough. It's that in principle, what we're doing is making that which we're trying to study not happen, essentially.
Mm. And how can people who want to have proof that what they are experiencing is not just in their head, how can they find such proof, if they can at all?
Well, first of all, the search for proof is the scientific method. I mean, that's scientific language. So proof is it's not going to be proven through the methods of science. However, what someone can do is compare, and one can find similar experiences reported by other people in other cultural contexts and other places and times, and then one can begin to see that these phenomena are actually quite common and don't rely on a culture or a society or a time period, and occur everywhere and everywhen. And then one can begin to feel much more comfortable, because then one's experiences are part of reality and not just one-offs, as it were.
So it's more a phenomenological proof via intersubjective experience, shared experience.
I think phenomenology, as it was first conceived, is definitely a way forward here, and is a really promising way. But remember, that's exactly what was rejected 40 or 50 years ago, that turn to phenomenology and that turn to the subject for this external third person view that has been dominant for decades now. Hopefully, Angela, your generation will reverse that or move us beyond that. But certainly my generation did not. My generation was duped, in my opinion, into that model.
Yeah, that's I hope that, things are gonna change.
It's really entirely up to you, Angela.
Me,
Yeah.
I'm the responsible.
No, and let me just back up a little and sort of eat some of my words. It's not that the third person perspective is wrong. It's not that the social reduction is wrong. It's actually correct, but it's not adequate. It's not adequate to the human being. It's not adequate to the human experience. And the reason I'm saying that is because of human beings, by the way. It's not because of something I thought or some kind of abstract rational process in my head. It's because I get emails every day from human beings who have experiences they can't explain, and they often suffer tremendously from them, precisely because there's no framework for them.
So it is understandable that people want to see want to find some kind of validation.
They do, and what they most want is not Jeff explaining to them, oh, this happened because of A, B, and C, but just they want another human being to say, I believe that happened. They're not looking for an explanation. They're not looking for a reduction to some kind of system. They're looking for what you call validation, or what I call authorization. They're looking for another human being to acknowledge the fact that this in fact happened to them.
Sometimes I wonder also whether it would be a good idea to be comfortable with being uncomfortable from an ontological point of view. It could be because I have my own worldview and belief system where I think I can't even be absolutely sure that I ontologically exist. So I find myself getting comfortable with the fact that I might not exist. That I might just appear into the existence of people that see me, but I don't think that I can ever find an absolute confirmation outside of what my senses suggest, which might be wrong, that I exist. So I don't have an absolute confirmation of my own existence. So to me, it feels like I'd feel comfortable enough to have a sort of a provisional belief, that certain things that appear to my existence and to the existence of others that I share meaning and significance with, that they appear to our existence, but whether they are ontologically real in an absolute sense, it's difficult to tell, as much as it is difficult to tell whether I exist personally. So that would be my reflection, getting comfortable with being ontologically uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is where my early training in Asian philosophical traditions comes in. I mean,
Same.
I don't think you do exist, by the way, and I don't think I exist
Neither
either.
do I.
Yeah, I'm very Buddhist at the end of the day. I'm like, yeah, that's social ego. That's something.
I did my bachelor's thesis on the concept of anatta in Buddhism.
Yeah,
so
there you go. There you go. So I mean, it's like, yeah, that's probably not a good one. That's probably, and this is where constructionism and a kind of reductionism really works. It's really powerful, right? I mean, a kind of social or linguistic reductionism, or a neuroscientific or a biological reductionism really works in the context of the anatta doctrine. However, the anatta doctrine is in this context of this larger system that really does have a kind of emptiness or kind of nirvana or kind of other reality that is bigger than the fact that there isn't a self. And I think that's what we lack in the academy. We're very good at the reduction and saying how there is no self, but we have nothing like nirvana or shunyata or any larger metaphysical or ontological system to contextualize that.
Well, I suppose from a positivist reductivist approach, the only things that exist are the material things. So it's our body, and everything emotion-wise can be explained by hormones and
that's
biological.
That's extremely depressing, by the way, to me. And it depresses our students too. I mean, I can see this in the students and the young people, and so I guess I feel very responsible to the students, and And of course, the idea that there's only matter or there's only physical objects, that's a belief system too.
Oh, I would agree. People who are reductivists believe that that's, it can be proven. And so that means that it's true. And it's like, yeah, it can be proven by the method that you designed based on their theoretical framework.
Right.
Yeah. Well done.
Yeah,
Well
it's
done
totally circular.
Yes. Well done creating a method that proves you right. Okay.
That's what I mean by taking things off the table, Angela. You just take everything off the table you can't explain, and then you can explain everything on the table.
Yeah. That's pretty much the reductivist approach summed up in my view.
And to go back to your doubting your own existence, I mean, that's what I call reflexivity. And I think this is what impossible thinking is at the end of the day. It's the ability to be reflexive about one's own worldview or even one's own existence, and to question it, and not to assume, not to think one's thoughts or not to believe one's beliefs, but to step outside them and say, well, maybe not. Maybe this other human being has a different set of experiences and a different set of beliefs, and those need to be acknowledged as well. And again, I don't know where that's going, Angela. We talked earlier about the superhumanities. People always ask me what the superhumanities are, and I'm like, this conversation is the superhumanities. It's a conversation. It's not an endpoint or a conclusion. And the superhumanities are basically the humanities that we were both trained in, but acknowledging that there are altered states or extraordinary experiences that don't actually fit in to those models, but that actually drive a lot of these activists and a lot of these artists and a lot of these authors, and looking very, very seriously at that superhuman component of the human experience.
Yeah, sometimes I also wonder whether this reductivist approach has also driven the fact that humanities are considered less and less, and there are continuously humanities.
Of course it's related.
And then people wonder why people vote a certain way and they aren't able to decipher data and information when, I don't know, global things happen. And it's like, I wonder why that is,
If you really hold a materialist worldview, then the implication of that is nothing mental or related to consciousness is real. It's all fluff. It's all tangential, and therefore you're going to dismiss those disciplines and those forms of knowledge that we branch under the humanities as having as their object the mental or the subjective or consciousness itself. I don't see a way around that. I just think that's a natural consequence of a materialist worldview.
Yeah, although obviously the mental side also influences the physical side, because humanities are also, I would also argue that all the aspects of humanities are incredibly important and they provide meaning to people's lives. So it's not just about keeping the machine going, it's also about providing meaning so that the machine wants to keep going. But also there's such an importance of humanities in providing, in teaching people critical thinking and, the ability to discern things in their reality and not just think by slogans and, being able to get into the depth of arguments and conversations. So I think that it has also very material implications, but humanities are precious in all of their aspects, not just that one. And we have a question from Vocatus. He says, I'm not familiar with your work, so let me naively ask, would something like Jung's theory of synchronicity or Brentano's work to give scientific rigor to metaphysical dialogue fall under your idea of making sense of the impossible?
Yeah, so Brentano, of course, is part of that phenomenological tradition, and this basic idea that consciousness is always intentional, I think, is a Western presumption. Again, to go back to the Asian philosophical training, consciousness is not always intentional. Certainly in an Asian philosophical system, but it is in Brentano. So when we get to something like Jung and the notion of synchronicity, I think we're closer to theorizing the impossible. What's significant about Jung is that he came up with that category through correspondence with Wolfgang Pauli, the quantum physicist. So this takes us back to the sciences. And what Jung was essentially arguing was that sometimes material events are organized around meaning, not around cause. And that they had this irreducible psychoid or mental feature to them. And so to answer the question, yes, I do think Jung's category of synchronicity with Pauli is an attempt to make sense of exactly these kinds of magical experiences. Synchronicity is basically a correspondence between what's going on mentally and what's going on materially, and it's an uncanny kind of hit, and it's also a moment in time where the physical corresponds to the psychic, and I think again that's a way of theorizing magic, essentially, I would say. So yes, to answer the friends or colleagues' question, yes. But I mean, we don't read Jung anymore, certainly in the academy, right? We read other people, or I mean, I'm just thinking, I shouldn't make universal statements like that, but certainly in my own zone, Jung is somebody that is read and listened to a lot outside the academy, but not so much inside the academy. I put it that way.
And why do you think that is?
I think that's a complicated question. I've had a lot of interaction with Jungians over the years and have spoken at Jungian institutes. I think Jung did struggle mightily with what I'm calling the impossible. And he did try to make sense of it. I think his analytic psychology or his archetypes there are not a bit naive, to be frank about it. I don't see them. I don't see the archetypes operating in other cultures outside his own Europe. But I do see his struggle with things like synchronicity or precognitive dreaming or out-of-body experiences. I do see that as significant and as applicable to other cultures and places and times. So I think it's mixed. I think Jung has to be engaged like any other thinker or theorist in our toolbox, and we have to be able to say where this theory works and where it doesn't with our particular materials, which are also always relative to, by the way, of course.
Yeah, I understand that. I do know academics that work with Jung, by the way, even here in the UK.
Good. Do you know, I mean, Roderick Mayne comes to mind as somebody who really does. And I mean, there are people who do work with Jung, but certainly in my own training, it was a very different kind of psychology. And now it's all neuroscience, of course, that has moved away from depth psychology, I think, unfortunately. But that's clearly the case, at least in the States.
And also, thank you, Jonette, for the super chat. And we have another question. I don't know if it's controversial, but Frater RC is asking, what do you think about Dr. Radin's work?
Yeah, no, I know. I've known Dean for 20 years. And first of all, he's a comedian posing as a psychologist. He's a very funny man. I think Dean is very brave and wants to turn parapsychological phenomena into a science. I told Dean for years that parapsychology is basically magic in a history of religion sense. And he later wrote a book called Real Magic, in which he basically agrees with that position. But again, Dean's position, like that of many parapsychologists, is contrary to what we said earlier. It's that the impossible can be operationalized. It can be turned into a technology. And I don't want to dismiss that or say that's wrong, because I don't know. And like, for example, some of my friends in the remote viewing community, they just tell me, well, Jeff, remote viewing works. We don't know how it works, but it works. And that I think is, I can certainly accept in a more humanities way, just acknowledging that the phenomena does happen and that it can be operationalized. It can be turned into a ritual practice. It's not my goal as a theorist or a scholar of religion to create a ritual practice, but human beings historically have turned these things into ritual practices. They really have. I know that. I know that as a historian. I know divination is probably one of the most common ritual systems on the planet. So clearly human beings have tried to use these things for their own ends. And I think parapsychology is a kind of modern American version of that, and I want to acknowledge and honor that.
Yeah, so I think you replied really to that question. And then there's go on.
Let me also say this to that question. I mean, this is something I told Dean this as well. I told a whole room full of parapsychologists this. The lecture I gave was called "Why You Are So Scary," and essentially what happens, at least in American parapsychology, is that a parapsychologist will go out and give a talk to some kind of public format, and they will often be accused of working for the devil or some kind of demonic work. And what I was trying to explain to them is the religious reasoning behind that. And the religious reasoning goes like this, basically. And I'm not saying that the religious people are aware of this either. That's not my argument. But parapsychology basically locates psi or paranormal abilities in the human being. So human beings are capable of these precognitive and psychokinetic and parapsychological phenomena. Monotheism or Christian theism locates agency for supernatural events outside the human in God. So something is good, something is holy, something is from God if it comes from outside the human, but if it comes from inside the human, it's clearly the human is working with the demon or the devil or it's doing something bad. And I think that's why parapsychologists are so scary, frankly, to religious people or to some religious people. They're not fearful to me. I think these are human capacities. I share the parapsychological conviction that these are human abilities, but I also know where the religious argument comes from, and it comes from this theistic kind of position that has been in Europe and the States for thousands of years, not hundreds.
And I was thinking that your book, How to Think Impossibly, suggests a radical openness to experiences that defy conventional paradigms. So how can individuals cultivate this kind of openness without falling into uncritical acceptance of extraordinary claims?
So first of all, in How to Think Impossibly, I tell a lot of stories, and those stories come from my interactions and conversations with experiencers. And one of the central categories of the book is thinking with, and I use a hyphen for it, thinking with. And essentially what I am arguing is that people's extraordinary experiences are the future of theory. But that the experiencers need the intellectuals to pull out the theory, but the intellectuals need the experiencers to have the experience. So it's not like one is better than the other. It's that both need to work together to produce a new worldview or new thought. And that's really where I'm going. My initial response to your question was humor. And I mean that. I think humor is a humble form of transcendence or reflexivity. And I think a lot of these experiences are funny, but they're funny in a metaphysical sense as well as in a social or linguistic sense. They're designed to take us out of ourselves and to get us to laugh at our worldviews or our belief systems. And so there are actually professional comedians that are part of this book, because I really think that comedy and humor and laughter are one very positive response to these kinds of experiences. But not laughter in the snarky, oh, I get the joke kind of way, but laughter in the sense of, oh, that's really not me. That's not the world. I can look back at it now and I can laugh about it, but it's just not the case.
Yeah, I suppose that. So would that be your suggestion for people that have these kind of experiences of how to approach them? I'm not saying make sense of them now.
I mean, that's part of the advice. The other part of the advice to people who have these experiences is community, is to look for people who have had similar kinds of experiences and get to know them and be with them. And because we're social creatures, Angela, and we need one another to reflect back each other's experiences. And I think what's so suffering and what's so destructive about anomalous experiences is that people feel alone. They feel like they're completely anomalous. And when they meet someone who's had this similar kind of experience, they're like, oh, okay, I'm not the freak I thought I was. I'm actually a human being, and so are you. And now let's talk about what this might possibly mean. I think that's a much healthier way forward than isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I think that's why our Archives of the Impossible conferences are so popular. And when I say popular, I mean in an academic sense. I mean, we had over 200 people come to the first two conferences. And for an academic conference at Rice, that's like, that just blows up all the models. And we had, just to give you a sense of this, when we post a lecture, we generally get 500 watches for the life of the lecture. We had 150,000 in 2 weeks. And so it just hit this nerve. And I think that nerve is exactly what I'm trying to articulate now. It's like, you are not alone. This is part of the human experience. Now, what do we make of it? And I think that helps explain or put into context the response to the conferences, which were pretty nerdy, by the way, Angela. I mean, it's basically academics and experiencers talking about their theories and their experiences, in a conference setting.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, it'd be nice to participate at one of those conferences. Sounds fun.
You should.
And another thing that I had in my mind, there's somebody in the chat saying that The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram is a good introduction to phenomenology. It's free to listen on Audible, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, so I know David. I know, at least I talked to him earlier. I mean, what I would say about David's work and phenomenology in general is it's not weird enough. And
what do you mean?
Well, it's what goes on the table and what gets taken off the table. And I want to keep things on the table that are really weird, because that's what happens to people. So, for example, I know a dear friend who encountered an 8-foot tall praying mantis in a purple cloak, by the way. Okay, that's nutty. That's absurd. But that's exactly what happened to him. I want phenomenology to talk about that too, and not just the natural world or the human being as we conceive the human being. So that's what I mean about not being weird enough. And a lot of disciplines today in the academy are just not weird enough for me. They don't, and by that, again, it just simply mean they don't keep on the table things that I think we need to keep on the table. And it's not that I understand the 8-foot praying mantis in a purple cloak. I don't get that either, but that's the point. That's my point.
There are people in the chat asking whether, how can you tell that is a real experience and not schizophrenia?
Well, because I know the people, and they don't strike me as schizophrenic at all. And schizophrenia, by the way, is just a category. I want to challenge the pathologization of the experience. How do we know, why do we think about mental pathology exclusive of paranormal or impossible phenomena? Maybe they're mixed. Maybe people who are suffering different pathologies are also opened up to other realities. Maybe things are coming in, and no, they're not mentally stable or right. I get that, but that doesn't mean that their experiences can be dismissed. So I think it's complicated. It's like psychedelic experience, Psychedelic experience, depending on the psychedelic, clearly involves some kind of human psychology, clearly involves context, clearly involves the situation that the human being is in. But that doesn't mean it's not opening the human being up to other realities as well. And I think that kind of both and is really the question here that I'm trying to get at. So I don't want to dismiss the mental suffering, but I also don't want to dismiss what's going on. And I'll tell you just a quick story there. It's
Sure.
a simple story. I worked at a locked women's ward when I was in a Catholic seminary. Every Saturday I went to this mental hospital and worked on this this floor that was for women who were completely they were out. They were gone, as we say. And one day I was coming back from that, and one of my colleagues, he was another seminarian, was really upset. And his name was Jim. And I asked Jim, I said, well, Jim, what's the matter? And he said to me, well, I was having this conversation with this woman, and I realized I wasn't saying anything. And Jim was so upset because of the telepathic phenomena that was just indubitable to him. There was just no question about it. And yet it was wrapped up in this clear mental pathology at the same time. And he didn't have a way of putting those two things together. And that's really what I'm trying to get at is maybe these things often appear together and not apart. And maybe we're not set up or designed, or maybe we haven't evolved to access reality, Angela. I mean, that's the deeper question here. Maybe our egos and our attas are there for a reason to keep us from these experiences.
And why would you think that is?
I don't know. So we can be social egos and make shit up and make money and reproduce and do all the things that Darwinian biology says we need to do. I don't know. It's a question. There's this deeper question of okay, let's call it an esoteric truth, and then there's the exoteric kind of worldview that we live in. And esoteric truth, it's not of course, it's not something I can tell you, I can whisper and give you a piece of data and suddenly the esoteric truth. No, it's that you're either ready to hear the esoteric truth or you're not. You either understand it or you don't, but it relies on your psychology and your spiritual orientation. It doesn't rely on the data that I tell you. And I've always wondered about that as a teacher. Most of my students don't give a crap what I say. I think apathy is the main response to what I teach. Uh, however, there's always this core of human beings who are like, oh my God, it's like you could just see the light bulbs going off. And the question for me is, okay, well, why are there always 10%? It's always 10% of the people, it seems like. Why is there this core that gets it right away, and then there's this huge nimbus that just doesn't care? Why is that? Why isn't everyone in the world listening to your podcast, Angela? Why is it only these people? I mean, that to me, that's a question.
These questions, so these metaphysical questions, in a way, remind me that in discussing UFOs and the near-death experiences and older state of consciousness, you blur the lines between subjective and objective realities. So do you think that these phenomena suggest a fundamentally participatory universe? And if so, what are the implications for how we conduct research, build knowledge, and interact with the impossible?
I mean, we talked about this a little earlier. I do think that these experiences tend toward a kind of non-duality, to a kind of unity or oneness or zero-ness, if you want to be Buddhist about it. And I think most all of certainly our academic disciplines are Descartesian and Newtonian and dualistic to the core. I think the notion of human reason and rationalism and logic and a kind of linear temporality is all the assumptions we make in our disciplines. And I think all of these assumptions are shown to be incorrect in these anomalous or impossible experiences. And so that's what I was trying to say earlier when I said I don't actually think they're integrable into the systems, because I think the systems are wrong. I think it requires a much bigger model of what reality is, a different way of thinking about reality than we have at the moment. And by the way, I don't want to raise up the Buddhists and say they're right either. I mean, maybe they had a lot of things right, but they no doubt had some things wrong too that maybe we can get right now. I mean, I think we do know things today that we didn't know, our ancestors didn't know 100 or 200 or 300 years ago. We just know stuff. We just do. This just goes back to the science. I mean, I think science is a wonderful thing. We know things about the universe and evolutionary biology and cosmic evolution. We know things about stars and galaxies. We just didn't know. We had no idea. And now we know. And we know things about evolutionary biology that we didn't know 200 years ago. We just didn't. So I think that's the big player, or the big kind of gorilla in the living room that we haven't really. Some of us have struggled with.
And so, do you think that what is desirable for humanity moving forward? Would it be to reclaim an enchanted worldview that includes the impossible? How would you picture humanity going forward in a more desirable way that includes everything on the table?
Yeah, so you're asking me to be a religious preacher, not a
No.
Yeah, well, I say that with humor. But you're asking me to be a visionary and a sort of a preacher of a particular worldview, which I'm not. However, of course, I have my ideas and my intuitions, and I think the beginning steps of that is acceptance and listening to one another. I mean, that sounds cheesy, but just listening to one another and accepting people's experiences, however strange they are, and not assuming the truth of our own worldview, whatever it is. Again, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's physics, I don't care if it's evangelical Christianity, or I don't care if it's some kind of Theravada Buddhism. I don't care. Your system does not explain the full range of human experience, nor does mine. And I think once we can begin there or start there, I think that's a conversation that's just getting going now. And that's what I mean. The superhumanities, it's not like this endpoint. I don't have a solution, Angela. It's not like I have a set of answers to give you, but I know the conversation we need to have for our ancestors, or for your generation, or for you personally now, to get there, and I really believe that. I really think this is about generativity and in generations. I don't think this is about this generation. Certainly it's not about me or you. That's why I love the archive, by the way. It's an intergenerational project. It's not a personal project. It's not a personal accomplishment.
Mm. And of all the things that you have studied, researched, and written about, what is the thing that is the most important to you, the most meaningful to you? The concept or the thing?
Yeah, I mean, I do get asked that a lot. I mean, I think the thing that's really impressed me probably the most is precognition, and particularly precognitive dreams, and what those have to say about time. I mean, essentially the way, certainly I think, is what does the world have to look like to make these experiences possible? And precognitive dreaming is something that is so common and so global and so universal that it's just so obvious to me. It's not even worth debating. I don't want to debate it. But what I do want to ask is, okay, well, what does time have to look like? Or what does space-time have to look like? What does the universe have to look like to render possible somebody seeing what's going to happen in 24 hours or 3 weeks or 3 years from now? And I mean down to detail. I mean down to banal detail. I don't mean, I'm going to be Napoleon. I mean, the office worker is going to come across the desk and there's going to be this accident at this intersection. And I mean really, really precise details. So to me, that's really, that sounds nerdy, but it's really, I think, relevant to a lot of human beings. And it's also really relevant to how we think about time and space and ourselves and our location in it.
Perhaps, and a little bit in a Kantian way, time is a function of the way that we interpret reality. It's not something that really unfolds between past, present, and future. It's just a way that we are designed to split it to understand it better, because otherwise we wouldn't make sense of the words that I'm saying if you wouldn't split them into past, present, and future. But are my words really divided into past, present, and future, or is it all happening at the same time? But it wouldn't be discernible if we were to actually absorb it all at the same time.
What strikes me though a lot is that people who have these experiences often suffer because of them, and they suffer because their cultural systems or their worldviews don't have a place for them. And I guess that's really what I'm talking about is. We need that. To go back to the UFO for a minute, I think the worldviews we're in are very dangerous. And the stories we have around the UFO are all Cold War narratives. They're essentially invasion narratives from the Cold War. And then you get a movie like Arrival, which is really about the circularity of time and precognition, and the main protagonist of it is actually a female linguist who has this sort of Worfian experience of language, and it's the circular language, which, by the way, looks a lot like a Zen circle that teaches her about the circularity of time, and that ends up becoming really healing. It actually ends up saving the planet, in the movie. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is we need need a fundamentally new story that doesn't work from these materialist or Cold War premises that we've had in the past, or frankly these old religious premises that we've had in the past about demons and angels and gods and blah blah blah. We need a new story.
And what new story would that be?
Again, that's I think that new story has something to do with what we know now, with quantum physics and evolutionary biology and cosmology and all these things we know about the universe. But I don't think that story is just a replication of those sciences or those disciplines. I think we have to really rethink it. And what that story is, again, I don't know, Angela. That's not my place to say what that story is. And it's probably many stories. But I do think the conversation needs to happen. And I think it's already happened. I think it's been happening for a long time. I think this is what modern literature is about. I think it's what science fiction is about. It's already the case.
Mm.
When people have a near-death experience, at least the ones I've talked to, they don't go to purgatory and see the Blessed Virgin Mary and the saints. Well, not at least people I talk to. They pop into other dimensions, or they see galactic formations, or they inhabit this super story I'm talking about.
Mm. Thank you, Jeff. So yeah. I'll let you go then. We've been here for quite some time. So if people want to find you and your work, is there any place that you would recommend them?
For the books, just go to Amazon. You can see all the books. But I do have a website. It's called jeffreyjkripal.com. And I kind of try to summarize everything there, kind of what's up, including the Archives of the Impossible. And you can, of course, come to the conference. It's April 3rd to the 5th is the next one.
Mm. And it's in Texas.
It's in Houston, Texas. It is.
Okay.
It's before it gets too hot, though. So
good to know.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Jeff, for coming over at Angela Symposium. It was a pleasure to have you here, and it was a very enlightening conversation. I'm sure that people loved it. I could read in the chat that people did.
Thanks for listening, and remember, it really is all up to you. We're relying on you.
Really? Are you serious?
No, I'm joking, but I'm not joking. It really is up to younger scholars and intellectuals and practitioners. It really is.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I will do my best.
Okay, all right. You're doing well. You're doing well now.
Thank you so much.
All right.
So thank you, all of you guys, for listening. And if you like this episode, which I hope you did, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, activate the notification bell so that you will never miss a new upload from me, and share this video around so that people can know more about Jeff's work, and or you can share any of my videos around. Anything really helps the symposium grow, so I would really appreciate any help. Yeah, so thank you for sticking around up until this point, and I hope that you all stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now. Today we hold it,